Alright, what's going on, you guys? It's Kay from K's Trend and Power. I've got an interesting story for you regarding the situation with COVID-19 in Poland. It's been more than 2 months since the announcement of the pandemic in our country, and let's say that this is a short reportage on that. Well, at the beginning there were many restrictions on several spheres of public life. That is, in terms of the public transport, as you can see, the number of passengers was very limited, depending on the means of transport. For instance, in trams the limit was around 8 people. Moreover, the cabin with the motorist was separated from the rest of the tram with tapes. There were no ticket inspectors whatsoever. Of course, warnings regarding keeping distance of at least 2 meters were everywhere. To be honest, I've been commuting to work 5 days a week since the announcement of the pandemic, and at the beginning there were very few people in trams or on buses. The whole city looked like a ghost town, not a living soul even at rush hours. As far as other restrictions are concerned, it was highly recommended to stay at home at all times, apart from going shopping for essential products or going out for a short walk. Also, children and teenagers were not allowed to go out without an adult with them. Obviously, everybody needed to wear masks, otherwise they would risk getting a ticket from the police. Needless to say, all shopping centers, restaurants, cinemas, theaters, and so on and so forth were shut down until further notice almost overnight. The worst thing during the state of pandemic was that there was no finish line to that, since every week the government would announce more restrictions and harsher restrictions on different spheres of life. So it happened that COVID-19 in Poland coincided with the presidential election, but I guess that this is a topic for a separate video, if at all. Anyway, the majority of business would either be temporarily closed or would move to working from home if possible. Probably the only branch not affected by the pandemic was supermarkets, whose profits must have skyrocketed at the initial stage of the outbreak and later on. Coming back to the restrictions, the number of people in supermarkets was very limited. What's more, at some point in time the government introduced the idea of the so-called senior hours, meaning the special time slot between 10 and 12 o'clock during which only elderly people could do the shopping. But the idea was quickly scrapped. In terms of gyms, it must have been and still is a disaster for the owners. I remember that the third week into the pandemic I received a phone call out of the blue from a receptionist from my gym, and she was almost begging me to sign up for online classes and trainings, since the staff was left without any income. Also, one of the most terrible things is the fact that hundreds of thousands of people were left without any source of money overnight. Those unlucky ones employed either on a contract of mandate or on a contract for specific work, especially in restaurants or the like, would be in big trouble because of that. And there are still bills to pay, mouths to feed, and little to no help from anyone. An idea of waiving the rent for 2 months was introduced in Spain, if I am not mistaken, and at least that was some form of help for the worse well-off. I'm not surprised that people are heavily depressed during COVID-19, since the fear of what tomorrow may or may not bring is terrible. Businesses keep closing and going bankrupt, so there is little comfort even for those lucky ones with the contract of labor. About 2 months ago, I also went to a blood center to donate blood, which I do 6 times a year, and whereas the place is usually packed with people on all days, especially on Saturdays, back then it was empty. Normally it may take even up to 3 hours of waiting in queues, donating samples, having a checkup done, etc. But then it was like a flash, 15 minutes tops, and I was done. Anyhow, maybe I shouldn't be saying that, but at least in big cities in Poland, the pandemic doesn't seem to be as grave as it's shown on the telly and in media. Especially after the initial shock and terror, people would start going out more often, going to work, and simply getting back to the normal ways of living. You don't see people dropping off like flies on the street, thank God. You don't even see anybody sneezing or coughing. Everything seems so quiet and normal. So now, looking back at the first few weeks of the pandemic, I'm not sure whether the whole problem wasn't blown out of proportion. But on the other hand, you got the example of the United States with hundreds of thousands of confirmed cases of COVID-19 and people dying in hospital beds. Fun, or rather terrifying fact. According to some research, more people are afraid about the economic situation and its shape in the future than of picking up the virus. Some countries have been toying around with the idea of the minimum guaranteed income, which may sound tempting in theory, but would it really work in practice? As one of my students aptly commented on that, many people in Poland would be satisfied with a minimum salary, but without any obligations and any strings attached. Still, such a form of income would be a lifesaver for those who want, but simply cannot work for some reason. Anyhow, so this is a short reportage, or rather a stream of thought, on the situation in Poland. 3 days ago, the government announced that the state of pandemic in Poland was officially over, so slowly various kinds of businesses will be reactivated. Now shopping centers, restaurants and bars are open, and soon gyms will be opened as well. Everything seems to be slowly coming back to normality, but there are still many question marks, especially if we're talking about the possible second wave of COVID-19. Well, I guess only time will tell what the future holds for us. Que sera, sera, as they say. Anyhow, thank you very much for your time, stay safe you guys, and all the best. K from K Stranded Power, signing out.